Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Joe Landon, Chief Executive Officer at Crescent Space, to the stage.
All right, thanks for joining. I'm Joe Landon. I'm the CEO of Crescent Space. Thanks for joining Space 2050, Vision for a Robust CisLunar Economy. But before we get to the moon in 2050, let's talk a little bit about Earth today. When we think about our economy here on Earth and building businesses on Earth, we take a lot of things for granted. We have power, we have internet, cellular phone service, a vast transportation network, stores to go buy things at, gas stations to fill up with gas. Our garbage gets picked up, our fires get put out. There's a vast amount of infrastructure. We're just surrounded by it, and we take it for granted. To start a company here in Las Vegas, you can get going in a matter of hours. You don't have to worry about investing in a power plant. You just call the power company and set up an account. It's that easy, right? You don't have to, you can focus on your business while the infrastructure companies focus on theirs. So let's now look at the moon. What's it like on the moon? Very different. Every lunar mission has to bring everything it will ever need along with it. Science missions have to worry about power and mobility and communications, everything. And that's not their core mission. And it's no wonder missions take long to develop and cost so much without any infrastructure to rely upon. So today we're going to talk about how to bend that curve, how to make it easier to do everything on the moon. We'll focus in on the first critical elements of infrastructure that we need to transform the CisLunar region into a growing and thriving CisLunar economy. To do this, we need to start not only thinking about what we take to the moon, but also what we leave behind. Every mission we send to the moon should make it a little easier for the next one. And this means we'll need to develop infrastructure for communications, navigation, power, mobility, natural resources, manufacturing, and more. Our speakers for this session represent some of the leading companies that are building that foundational infrastructure. Each of our speakers will talk about their vision for the CisLunar economy and what role they will play in providing essential services. Then we'll talk about the challenges and opportunities for companies to build infrastructure to serve the many markets that will develop. So let's say hello to our panel today. First, to my left, I have Dan Hendrickson, the Vice President for Business Development at Astrobotic. Then Kathy Laurini, Senior Advisor at Dynetics. Jaret Matthews, Founder and CEO of Venturi Astrolab. And Steinke, Chief Operating Officer, CisLunar Industries. And I'm Joe Landon, the CEO of Crescent Space. So we'll start with Crescent's CisLunar vision. So Crescent is a commercial services company created by Lockheed Martin that provides infrastructure as a service for lunar missions. We leverage Lockheed Martin's deep technical expertise and heritage and reliability in space with the speed and agility of a commercial services platform to deliver services needed to operate on and around the moon. And when we think about the future, we expect NASA to be the driver of the early lunar economy, and its goals are science, human, and robotic exploration, and capability development. But that can also be leveraged forward to Mars. And that future also includes a new thriving commercial economy to provide services first to government science and exploration missions, but later to other applications that will emerge. And when we envision the 2050 CisLunar economy, we see regular commercial delivery services from Earth and back to the moon for cargo and people. We'll be able to find, extract, and process valuable resources from the moon to create fuel and sustain human life. Companies will use those resources to manufacture products on the moon, to build and fix things. We can store and process data on the moon, so we don't have to send those bits back and forth to Earth and wait for those signals to come back. And commercial companies will be able to plan their businesses around the availability of common commercial infrastructure like power, communications, surface mobility, navigation, imagery and mapping, and human habitation. And Crescent Space's role in this future is building the Parsec network, a commercial constellation of communications relay satellites that will enable connection from the moon to assets on and around the moon back to Earth. These satellites are an orbiting relay network to provide complete coverage around the moon for navigation purposes and for communications relay. And we really see communications and position navigation and timing as step 0 for lunar infrastructure, the most important foundational element of infrastructure needed to enable that future CisLunar economy. So next I'll invite the panelists to do a more proper introduction of themselves and their companies, and also talk about their vision for the CisLunar economy. Dan, you want to start?
Sure. Thank you very much, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak here today. My name is Dan Hendrickson. I'm with Astrobotic, a lunar logistics company based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We're known for our lunar delivery services, starting with our landers and rovers. And in fact, our first delivery of payloads from 16 different customers is going to be occurring on December 24th. It's actually just late breaking today that they announced the launch date of our first mission with ULA. So we're really excited to look ahead to a very peregrine Christmas. So tune in and watch. We're incredibly excited. After 16 years of talking about doing these missions, we are launching just weeks away. So it's a really exciting time at Astrobotic. So we're known for delivery, and that's kind of what we're kicking off. That's going to open up, we hope, a new era of science, exploration, and commerce on the moon. But over time, working with the customer base that we have over the last 16 years, we've come to appreciate the tyranny of the lunar night must be broken. It's too challenging to operate just for 10 or 14 days on the lunar surface and expect to close a business case, to settle a scientific question, ultimately explore a new region. And so with that in mind, we're looking to build what we're calling LunaGrid, which you can see on the screen. This is a lunar power generation and distribution system that takes all of the different elements that were already funded and already under development at Astrobotic and bring them all together to provide power so that it's no longer necessary to bring every power solution for each surface element each time it comes down to the moon. So as you can see, it's based in using, again, our lunar landers, our lunar rovers. We're also utilizing our vertical solar array technology, which are under development with NASA STMD. And from each solar tower, which is essentially acts as a node, we have cables that come out from those towers, are attached to cube rovers that act as essentially mobile power plugs. So they have wireless chargers on board. Again, the cube rover, the VSAT, the wireless chargers, all of that is under development and funded right now under NASA STMD contracts. And so this is ultimately a grid that we want to distribute, scale over time, and again, end the tyranny of the lunar night and ultimately provide power services such that surface assets no longer have to bring their solution, as Joe so eloquently pointed out at the beginning. And that's kind of the next plateau, the next thing that we're going to climb as a company, as we bring all these product elements together that are already under development to provide these backbone services. Thanks.
Great. Over to Kathy.
Hi, my name is Kathy Laurini, and I play a strategic and advisory role at Dynetics. Dynetics is a subsidiary, a wholly owned subsidiary of the Leidos Corporation, and we do work in support of national security and civil space. We do things in both the hardware domain. We're building the upper stage adapter for SLS and a laser air monitoring system for LAMS, and also the services arena. Leidos is the prime contractor for the ISS cargo mission contractor. We also play a big role in the human health and performance contract. So services and hardware are both in our wheelhouse. I'm going to talk a little bit about our vision and my thoughts on how the economy in 2050 will evolve. Before I joined Dynetics, I worked for NASA for 35 years, and the last 10 years of my career were spent doing the strategy and formulation work that led to Moon to Mars, and so I was a part of that team. So I've been thinking about this problem for a long time, and so I'm going to throw a lot of those thoughts in. And when I first think about a 2050 lunar economy, you think about what are the things that are going to be creating value on the moon that justify all the investment that's going to have to go into making it happen, right? You know, there's a lot of things that people talk about that can go on the moon, but what are really the things that are going to bring enough value to justify the costs, value to the terrestrial economy? And I come to three basic things. First of all, in-space manufacturing. Second of all, resources. And third, geopolitical benefits. And let me talk about each one of those for a second. So in-space manufacturing is really recognizing that there's a lot of assets in space today that power our terrestrial economy, you know, comm and navigation systems, GPS systems, Earth observation systems. There's other things for national security purposes in space. And by 2050, there will be a whole lot more infrastructure in space, without a doubt. There'll be commercial space stations. There'll probably be a lot of solutions that smart people have come up with to help address some of our climate change issues. For example, maybe we'll be beaming power from space down to Earth. Maybe we'll have some idea of releasing trapped greenhouse gases, things that will help the overall climate change situation. So if you envision a lot of assets in space, it makes sense to think about an in-space manufacturing capability to service the assets that are in space. And I think as we learn more about the resources on the moon, I mean, the moon as a stable place, a lot of that in-space manufacturing can probably be done in low Earth orbit or around the moon. But on the surface of the moon, you have some other benefits like the partial gravity. You have the resources that are there, so it'll play a role in protecting and supporting the assets that we have in space. The second thing I think that's going to justify a lunar economy or drive a lunar economy is resources. I mentioned, you know, we talk a lot about volatiles, we talk a lot about minerals. We've got a lot of data from orbital assets that say things are there that are very interesting. We heard the Chandrayaan-3 presentation at lunchtime today, and they have some ground truth information confirming some things are there. But you know, in the next few years, we'll be doing more missions to really understand what's there. And once we do, it will feed the people that are thinking about these business cases around mining or around processing the volatiles for use. And the geopolitical benefits, I think, you know, NASA leading the way back to the moon. You heard Pam talk about it, and the NASA staff, NASA leaders in a follow-on panel this morning. But a presence on the moon, a human presence on the moon, is going to be a strong supporter of demonstrating our leadership, our technical advancement, and put us in the position that we enjoy today with our allies to help drive positive change in the world. So those three benefits, I think, are going to drive the lunar economy. And what does it look like? You know, you see on this chart basically sites that are distributed around the moon. You know, there might be a mining site, there might be a site gathering building materials to service other needs, but there'll be mining sites, there'll be ISRU sites, there'll be manufacturing sites for supporting the lunar economy, and it will need infrastructure to move goods and services around, and each of these sites will need basic infrastructure, like the infrastructure Joe talked about and that Dan talked about, so power and communications, and you know, I differentiate infrastructure from the things that provide value, right? The infrastructure providers are going to have a different important role, but the people that are, you know, doing things, producing things on the moon that drive the value, that justify the costs, are going to be the drivers of the economy. Dynetics, what are we thinking about doing? You know, I mentioned we're a service provider. You see some pictures of our hardware concepts that we've been evolving. You see the cargo alpaca. You know, we funded design up through PDR through NASA's Human Landing System. And our vision was always to refuel that in CisLunar space and ultimately on the surface of the moon to be able to move things around on the surface, get things off the surface to the system that will take it back to Earth. And then you see the LTV, our lunar terrain vehicle, and you know, our partnership with NASCAR ensures we're going to be the fastest delivery service on the moon.
We'll see about that.
But anyway, those are ways we hope to be able to bring our services expertise to support the people that are really, like I said, creating the value.
Okay, great. Jaret, you want to tell us about the Flex rover?
All right, thank you. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jaret Matthews. I'm the founder and CEO of Astrolab. We're based in Hawthorne, California, 3 years old. Prior to founding Astrolab, I was at SpaceX for a long time, and JPL before that, working on planetary rovers. And really, the inspiration for starting this company was really seeing NASA's investments in large lunar landers start to take shape, including Starship, and now also, of course, the Blue Origin lander. And those vehicles, which are capable of putting tens to 100 tons of cargo down on the lunar surface, I think really present a unique opportunity to rethink how surface logistics are done and how we approach the entire problem of operating on the surface of the moon. And so FLEX is our product. It stands for the Flexible Logistics and Exploration Rover. And I apologize, this is actually supposed to be a video, but that's a pretty cool still from it. But FLEX is essentially solving the last mile transportation problem in the context of these large lunar landers. So the way I like to think of it is we're very much inspired by how you do logistics on Earth. You have ships crossing the ocean, and they're laden with many thousands of cargo containers, and at the port you have vehicles that take those containers their last mile. But really that's our beachhead business, and our ultimate vision is actually to establish a business park on the moon. And I'm very aligned with Dan's sentiment that you really got to establish the power and communications infrastructure first before any of these value-creating businesses can do anything. And if we take how business operates on Earth as an analog, you have local governments put in that infrastructure first, right? They put in the power systems, they put in roads so that a mining operation can take place in a remote area. So I don't think we should necessarily reinvent that solution, and I'd like to see NASA over time take inspiration from those solutions that already work here on Earth, and particularly in how they're financed. If you take power, for example, the government, when they want a new power station, they often will create a power purchasing agreement, right? And basically guarantee for a period of time we will buy, kilowatt hours of energy at a certain price, and then a private company can go out and raise the financing, to develop that infrastructure. And it's a great model, and I'd love to see that applied to the moon as well, which takes the risk off of NASA and puts it onto private industry. But I think there's a lot of capital out there that is ready to support this as long as they know that a market exists. And so I think that's one of the really important things that NASA could be doing in the future is creating the market.
Great. Thanks.
Sorry, and one more. With respect to the lunar economy, I take a little offense to the title of this because I don't think we should have to wait to 2050 to have a robust CisLunar economy. So we should be doing it in the next.
It'll be very robust by then. Yeah. Great. All right, Lee.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here on this panel with my compadres here. I am the COO of CisLunar Industries, and I studied Latin and Ancient Greek in college before I discovered the science that I went on to do later in my career. But I never went to Greece until this past summer. And day one, before we even went to the hotel, we went straight to the Acropolis, which is that famous hill with the Parthenon at the top. And you go, it's a really hot day, we're climbing up the hill, you have to go around the side of it to wind your way up. And we stopped a few times to take sips of water and stand in the shade for a minute or two. And one of the places that we stopped, there was a little depression in the side of the hill, just up the hill from where we were. And it was surrounded by a little stone wall, just about 20 or 30 feet wide. And it's just a sign over this depression. It said Bronze Foundry. And so right there on the side of one of the most famous hills in the world, they wanted to process metal at the point of need for the various tools and equipment, as well as the decorations, the bridles on the horses. They wanted to be able to make them right there. And so CisLunar Industries fills that need with metal processing in space, in orbit and on the lunar surface, as well as places beyond. And so what we've developed, our technology, is a modular space foundry. And we can take natural and man-made sources and convert those into useful products. So, whether it's space debris, imported raw materials that need to be reformed, recyclables like equipment or containers that we're finished with, as well as natural resources that a few others have mentioned. We can take those and turn them into useful products like wire, which can be used as filament for additive manufacturing, as well as power cables. We've talked about already wire and cable for power transmission. So really important to have wire, and we just started making that in the last 2 months with our equipment. Of course, manufacturing feedstocks like rods, tubes, sheet metal that can then be formed into construction components like beams and trusses, scaffolding for towers that will be needed for both communications and power infrastructure. And then launchables, not to be confused with Lunchables. So things like our metal propellant rods that we're developing in partnership with Space Force for station keeping and in-space propulsion. We can create those in bulk from those materials on the moon and launch them and keep to a fuel depot for distribution. In the process of creating that metal foundry, we had to be able to convert solar power in DC to AC power to drive our induction furnace. And it turns out that what we designed in-house for our own purposes is differentiated from a space standpoint. It's lighter, it's smaller, and it works at very high efficiency with a broader range of output voltages than a lot of the things we've done in space so far. And so we've actually been able to begin to commercialize that, have our first commercial revenue this year in power converters. And so we've found a way to survive to this longer term vision by leveraging the things that we were doing as part of our technology stack anyway, the subsystems that we're creating, in order to drive that longer term vision.
All right. Thanks. So now I want to invite everyone out there to submit questions. There is a QR code here somewhere, or we could switch to the QR code. We'd really look forward to answering questions from folks out in the audience. There's a QR code there. You scan that, you enter a question. Even if you don't have a question of your own, go ahead in and you can upvote questions to get the ones at the top of the list that you want to hear answered. So let's start with a question for all the panelists here. We talked a lot about opportunities and sort of how we get there. I'd like to dig in a little bit more on what are the biggest challenges in your infrastructure area that we need to overcome. And I think Jaret really brought up an interesting one, this idea of a power purchase agreement. And to generalize that, can the government be a market maker or provide these demand signals? I think that's an interesting topic to build on. But maybe you want to start there with Jaret if you want to expand on that, or where are other technical or political or economic hurdles that you see?
Sure, yeah, and I guess another thought on the power purchasing agreement, you could apply that to many other services, right? You could apply it to communications, you could apply it to data collection, to data processing, storage, mobility, regolith collection, et cetera. But I think we all understand the federal budget is constrained, and so I think taking creative ideas that work well already here on Earth, especially from the financing perspective, is worthy of some thought. With respect to risks, I think, especially when we look out to this kind of time scale, it's no secret that other countries have their eyes on the really enticing parts of the moon. NASA put out a map of 14 areas at the South Pole that they're particularly interested in. China did the same, and if you overlay them, they perfectly match. And that's for good reason, because they're in strategically important places near resources with good view of Earth and Sun. And so and there's currently a legal opening that would permit a country to land an asset and then essentially declare an exclusion zone around it on the basis that per the Outer Space Treaty you can't disrupt another country's existing assets. And so I think there's a real risk that there's essentially a land grab takes place for these strategically important areas, and because we don't have a good understanding of how close can you land an incoming lander to an existing asset. Right now there's the opportunity for any country to put an arbitrary number on it and say you can't come within 500 kilometers of our lander because you're going to damage it, and essentially have a de facto land grab by just landing landers in strategically important areas.
Right. Dan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. We're very interested in utilizing solar-based power to start for our lunar power grid because we think speed is of the essence. It's critical to get there as soon as possible, and we understand solar. There's going to be other power sources in the future that we hope to tap into for lunar grid, like fission surface power, but it's critical to get to those key locations where you cross the lighting conditions with maybe areas of interest for resources at permanently shadowed regions, and I think that's really important to get there soon. Because of that competitive angle that I think is spot on. I think another challenge I think that we have as a company that's focused on developing infrastructure is knowing where we can plan to have that infrastructure. So 14 sites is great, but there's going to be a need to narrow down at some point, and the key lighting conditions for our infrastructure to be useful is sensitive, and we need to start to plan around the key locations that we know that the customers are going to want to operate. So as we make investments for our own power developments, we want to make sure that they're going to be relevant and useful to the customer. So knowing where we should go, but then going quickly because it is going to be a competitive environment is a challenge.
Right. Lee?
Yeah, I actually want to go and zoom out or back up to some of the economic troubles or challenges that we're going to have to overcome, and go back to some things that Kathy said in her introduction about the value of the moon. I think when we understand that those key value points are what we're chasing in going to the moon, we're not just doing it for fun. And I don't think that we do a good enough job that, I think there's an expectation that commercial space and commercial investment in space is going to drive this future. But I don't think we do a good enough job of doing break-even analysis with the competitive resources that we have here on Earth, or can solve the problems in completely different ways. So when we say we need to develop natural resources on the moon, yes, but how hard is it to do that versus how hard would we work to do something a little bit cheaper that we just have not done on Earth because it's inconvenient or we don't want it in our backyard? Going to the moon is really hard to develop natural resources, and I don't think when we're communicating with other industries that could really help us, the mining industry, we're not doing a good enough job of communicating why the moon competes adequately with these other things that we could do, the seafloor, Antarctica, whatever it may be, to find other solutions to the same problems. And so I think by getting better at that, we could really draw in other industry support and get those dollars to be bigger and get us there faster.
Yeah, and I'll build on that. A big challenge I see is the need for coordination. There's a lot of actors in all these panels on 2050 you've heard. The topic of coordination has come up, and that's because it's going to really take all of us. And I think it also extends to LEO. In LEO, we're building an economy before. We'll probably see a LEO economy, before, or let's say if Jaret's right, similar time frame. But in LEO, as we define what the future of LEO looks like with these commercial stations, commercial destinations, a commercial destination provider can think like, vertically integrating everything, and I'm going to do it all myself. Or they can think like an economy. They can recognize that an economy will grow if I focus on delivering my services of the platform, but I have other people delivering delivering the crew, delivering the cargo, other people that are managing the food system, the logistics services that are required. So think about all the infrastructure that's needed to support the, think about the infrastructure that's needed to support the platform, whether it's on the moon or in LEO, and have infrastructure providers be infrastructure providers and challenge them to be able to, and enable them through various ways that have been brought up on this panel already to deploy capabilities that are certainly going to evolve from what's needed in the near term in the next 5 years to what is needed to have a robust economy in 2050.
Great. So Lee, I want to go back to you. You mentioned how you are at CisLunar Industries, you're already selling power converters, right, as an early revenue stream. So talk a little bit more about, how can we build connections with terrestrial industries? Can, as we go on this journey to build infrastructure at the moon, is there ways to really tie it back to value here on Earth?
Yeah, so I think talking with other industries, I think that you can watch the patterns of how industries have begun to be convinced that there's value here, right? So obviously aerospace is the first one, but you'll notice that automotive is kind of the first to jump in, right? And that makes sense because satellite servicing is kind of moving things around like transportation, and rovers are kind of moving things around like transportation. So that makes sense from a technical standpoint that automotive would be interested. And we've got my friend from Mitsubishi is here today, Toyota, Porsche, GM's been in it forever. There's really good engagement there that's growing. But I don't think the only reason is because it looks like what they do, right? If it were, then we're going to have to wait a while before the mining companies are really going to come in and help us with this thing. So I think that if you think of the cadence of innovation of these different industries, you can see another explanation for the timing, right? So automotive industry is having to innovate on an annual basis, right? Whether it's to solve technical problems, to improve efficiencies, or to appeal to new markets, or to appeal to the same markets over and over again. They're having to innovate and compete with each other in this innovation on an annual basis. And so if you compare that cadence of innovation to kind of missions that have launch windows very frequently, right? So some sort of orbital parameter that relates to launch windows. Then with automotive, because they're used to innovating on this cycle, you get launch windows all the time, you talk to them, you meet with them a few times, they're going to say, oh yeah, I could get involved in this way, and they'll take that next launch. But if you look at oil and gas, if you look at mining, the cadence of innovation is much longer. You have much fewer launch windows and much longer periods of time between those launch windows. And so I don't know that we're communicating enough and getting those touch points. I mean, we don't start working on a mission to the Trojan asteroids the week before the launch window to the Trojan asteroids, right? We start working on it now, and we work as long as we can until that moment when it's supposed to launch. And so I think we need to be talking to these other industries more regularly. I'll be at a mining conference tomorrow on a similar panel to this one, in their neighborhood rather than in our own playground. And I think we need to do more of that.
Yeah, so there's some really great questions coming in. I'm going to shift to one that really builds on this. And if we could put the QR code back up, I think we can get some more questions still. So on this idea of working with Earth and value for Earth, there's a question here, but there's also an assertion or a theory that's proposed in this question. It's ultimately for a cislunar economy to be robust, it has to create value to the people on Earth. So is that sort of true or false, I guess, for the panel? I mean, my view is I think that I would challenge that assertion. I think that an economy can create value. It doesn't necessarily have to create value for somewhere else. That is a formula. If you look at GDP, exports are part of that formula, but it's not all of it. So I think that we can create a robust economy on the moon by creating value on the moon. So what do you think, Dan?
I think you're absolutely right. I think there is opportunity, though, for the terrestrial part, which I'm really excited about. When we're looking at developing a power service, we're looking to really flip the script on the economic equation of sending one of our missions to the surface. So it's not going to be such that we operate just for 14 days and then the lander dies. If you have a power grid that can provide service continuously, you could actually take a single mission that carries a rover, and then you can have it operate potentially, you might say indefinitely, and then you can start to carve up time on that rover, and it actually might be interesting then for industries on Earth at price points where maybe they buy an hour instead of a full mission and pay for the launch and the spacecraft and everything involved in operating it, which makes it, of course, inordinately expensive for most industries on Earth to consider it. So I'm actually really excited about that possibility. I do agree with your premise, but I think there's an opportunity with something like a power grid where we can actually change and sell time to make it more relevant for Earth-based markets.
Yeah. What do you think, Kathy?
I disagree. I think the money to fund all this stuff is going to come from people on Earth, so the benefits have to come back to the people on Earth. Yes, value is created on the moon, but it's for the benefit of people on Earth. So I think that's just going to have to be a necessary ingredient.
Yeah. So, an economy, the way you measure an economy on Earth is GDP. There's formulas, and that is the total value of all the goods and services produced by that place, right? So I think we can create value on the moon. I mean, even in space today, all the money exchanged is between someone on Earth and someone else on Earth. Right? But I do think in the future, in a 2050 vision, we're going to have services being provided on the moon, and for the benefit of commercial activity on the moon. So I think it does start to change how we think about the economy in that way.
I also think you'll see the moon being an important part of the space economy at large. Mm-hmm. It's 20 times less energy to get a kilogram off the moon and into space than it is off of Earth. Mm-hmm. And there's all the same metals, that are important to us here that exist on the moon. I think the reason people struggle with this concept is they imagine all the infrastructure it's going to take to start producing sheets of aluminum on the moon. But what's important about this period is that the long-haul transportation network is being built right now that is capable of bringing that scale of industrial equipment to the moon. And then once it's there, you're surrounded by feedstock, material that you can create value from for use on the moon, for use in space. Maybe there won't be a robust, export to Earth's surface economy, for a while, of aluminum, for example. But you could see a lot of it being bought and sold on the moon and in space, for sure.
Yeah. If you look at the New World, I would argue that it's not one or the other. It's a really good question. It's perfect for a panel. But my view is that first, it has to be providing value for Earth, like in sending resources back and forth, and it has to be very, very closely connected, like the New World was to the Old World. And then at some point, it will change. And whether that's on the moon or in a slightly more friendly place like Mars that actually has an atmosphere, I don't know. But I think there's a tipping point there. But first, it has to start with being valuable to us.
No, so this is great. This is a great discussion, and especially after what Jaret said, I can tell if there's any venture capitalists in the room, I think they're on the edge of their seats right now. Like, you're telling a really exciting story. So, one of the questions here is about what is the venture capital interest and appetite for investment in the moon? I mean, this is a new and speculative market. I think that we all here on stage have really strong conviction that this is going to be a growing and a very large market. But maybe Jaret or Lee, as you've gone out to raise money for your ventures, what kind of reception have you had? What kind of questions do you get?
Some of the questions are not unlike the audience question there, which is why I think it is important to get demand signals from NASA for the infrastructure. But, fundamentally, the story I like to weave is the moon has the same surface area, a little actually larger than Africa. Now imagine a new continent popped up in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and we had the means to go to it. There would be a mad dash to go extract value from it, right? Well, we're building the transportation, means right now to cross that ocean to get to this continent. And so to me, the scale of the opportunity is nothing short of continental, right? And that kind of, thing that, any number ending with a T or even a Q, gets venture capital very excited. And you're starting to see, capital flow towards companies in this space. iSpace has been very successful in raising recently. Intuitive Machines, went public. And I just read about one this morning, a $100 million seed round in a lunar company in Singapore.
Wow.
So things are heating up. The moon's hot. Invest now.
There we go. Right? You heard it here first. Right? Great. Let's see. One of the top questions here is about the role of government, as a customer. So let's think about, what does this market look like? Is the government the only customer? For how long? I think my view is, there's going to be a time now when the government is really an anchor or a significant customer. But the way we have commercial companies represented here who are going to be selling to the government, but we're also going to be selling to each other. And that, I think, is my answer to that question is yes, the economy will be driven by government missions, but there's going to be a lot of commercial deals going on between companies to provide services, to provide support, to help achieve and execute those government missions. What do you think, Dan?
Agreed. I think in our case, we want to provide power to the anchor customer, but we also want to provide power to hopefully everybody that's on the stage. Ultimately, we want to provide it and make it a service that can just be purchased by the watt and make that a capability. But there is going to have to be an initial demand coming from the Artemis program for something like infrastructure of power on the moon.
Jaret mentioned the importance of the demand signal from NASA, but I think it's just as important for companies that are thinking about a business on the moon that's not around infrastructure, a value-creating business, if you will, to also publish their demand signals, because that's going to help infrastructure providers determine what the initial deployment would look like and how it will evolve as the economy evolves.
Yeah. Just in terms of the first products and services, that we think about, those right-hand column on my slide, I think the government needs to wave that flag and they need to push us along, but there has to be justification beyond that for sure. Even if it's just small things like replacement parts or food products that we're exchanging between each other, relative to the big, we're going to launch you and send you, however many millions of miles. But yeah, I think it's got to be both.
So we've just got a few minutes left, and we're going to do a final lightning round question, but I'm going to pull it from the audience. So get ready, panelists. So there's a question about a specific, what is a specific tipping point metric for a viable commercial marketplace? And I'll turn that around. Like, how will we know? What will you look for? What will we see when we have a robust CisLunar economy? Like, how will we know that we're there? And we'll just go down the line.
Yeah.
Start with.
I think when you have transactions taking place, when you're looking to the moon for what you need on the moon, the resource development, the processing capabilities, the power, and communication infrastructure. It's when you don't have to go, when's that next Starship coming? It's even if it's just in some category, you've made it in that category.
Right, Jaret.
I think it'll be hard to say, what the line is, but I think, there's already the kernels of it happening now. We, for example, we have purchased a rideshare, ride to the moon in 2026 for our rover. It's a purely private mission. We're selling our capacity on our rover to downstream customers. We've signed a number of agreements with a bunch of commercial companies. What's interesting is the diversity of their business plans. These are all value-creating companies, and they're all interested in doing different things. And we're trying to be the picks and shovels of the moon rush, and really support the whole ecosystem of other companies who are going to create value on the moon with what we're doing. So I don't know when we'll know, but I think it'll be sooner than you think.
Great. Kathy, what's our success metric?
I guess in my mind, it's when there's value-creating activities that are supported by a robust infrastructure that feeds more value-creating activities on the moon. And value-creating means people are making money.
I'll say when there's two companies that have the government as a marginal buyer on payload or power or something on the moon.
Yeah, great. And mine is similar to Lee's, where we have transactions taking place on the moon with no nexus to Earth at all. And we start to wonder about things like, what currency should we be paying in? Maybe we need a new one for the moon. So we'll leave it with that. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate the panelists. Thank you very much.